Good day. Welcome to another lesson on our Super Dealmaker program. Today we're looking at the skills program, access to funding. Under access to funding, we have different topics that we have looked at. And today we're looking at sourcing commercial funding. Just to recap, we've looked at the South African funding or financing system, how it works, and the dynamics that you can find in the system, how it operates and all that. That was the introduction. Then we went into looking at bootstrapping, meaning entrepreneurs funding their businesses from their own resources or from the family resources, or raising money on their personal capacity to set up the business. And if you recall, when we were doing that topic, I've indicated that is my preferred, okay, not necessarily my preferred, but that's a preferred one, because initially you don't have the business or you don't have a proven concept as yet. So for you to register the company, to make sure that you get all the regulatory certificates and requirements, it will need some kind of funding. And because you haven't yet proven the commercial viability of the business, it will be necessary, or it's difficult to get external funding. So you have to fund those things using your own capital, which is now bootstrapping. And after you've funded the initial registration, tax, opening bank accounts, and then you need to make sure that your business is operationally compliant, like you have the trading certificate if required, you have the maybe food and safety if you are selling food, accreditation if you are in training, licenses if you are maybe setting up a service station, or if you are setting up a mine, you also need a license. So there is the second, I call them two initial funding. The initial funding is just the administrative one, where you're spending money on registrations and all those things. So you need to use your own funds. And then the second one, okay, in the initial one, it includes developing maybe a business plan or a feasibility study of some kind to prove that this business concept will work, or this business concept is viable. And then the second stage is maybe getting the relevant industry accreditations, licenses, maybe doing a detailed feasibility study that require funding, and maybe we need to do what is called EIA, meaning environmental impact assessment. So those are the two initial funding. But the second one, sometimes we can get commercial funders like your TFIs, your enterprise development entities from maybe local government. They can assist sometimes with that secondary initial funding. So when we were talking about bootstrapping, we talked about those. And then we went and we also spoke about the grant or incentive schemes. We discussed how you can access those and where you're supposed to look for those opportunities, and the process that you need to follow for you to access grants and incentives. And we said in that, when we're doing that topic, to say, look, with grants and incentives, the institutions that are issuing those grants, they have specific mandates that they want to achieve. So it's not generally available funding option that you can, when you're setting up, rely on it, because they exist for a certain period of time for a specific purpose. You need to make sure that when you start the business, obviously you need to explore if there are any grants or incentive schemes that exist out there that can assist you to expand or set up your business. But they're not always available. There are certain grants that exist at different times. So it is not a standard, reliable type of funding mechanism that you can say that even next year when I set up, I'm going to set up or I'm going to expand using the grants. They might not be there. So you need to be careful. It is a funding mechanism, but it's not guaranteed that it's always there. That's what we looked at in terms of the grant, but we also looked at how you can access the grants, how can you make sure that you monitor and apply for those grants, and we also mentioned that, remember, the grants are open to everyone. So it's sometimes difficult for people to secure or for everyone to get access to those grants. So they have a limited budget, and because they are open to everyone, tend to get a lot of applications. So it's not a sure thing that you will be able to secure the grants, but you need to be open-minded, set up the systems that will allow you to be able to access those grants, because the advantages of the grants is that they are free. You don't have to repay them. So they go a long way because they are a type of equity funding where they don't have a repayment term. They don't have repayment terms. And then in that way, it's like they're putting equity into your business that will allow you to do certain things without being under pressure that you need to repay the investment that they've put in your business. That was the second funding mechanism that we looked at. And the third one, we looked at angel investing. Angel investing is where high net worth individuals invest in certain businesses. And they have a mandate, and we indicated that sometimes you find there are commercial angel investors and there are social commercial investors, meaning the social ones, they invest more on the cause that they believe in, making a difference in certain sectors. And the commercial ones, they are investing in businesses that will give them a good return on investment. So they're willing to take risk on businesses that have good return on investment, meaning that they are looking at investing as a commercial activity rather than making a difference. So the social ones are more maybe pushing certain agenda, like maybe you're being green, poverty alleviation or eradication, supporting certain groups like your women, youth, maybe people with disabilities. You have high net individuals, which are called angel investors. And on the other side, you have the commercial ones who invest in high growth businesses. And we have advised or indicated that as an entrepreneur, if you are considering going for the angel investing route, you need to assess your business to see who are the angel investors out there, what are they looking for, do you meet their investment criteria. And we indicated that the businesses that are likely to attract or secure angel investing are the businesses that have a very high growth potential, because angel investors, they take risk in a lot of businesses, and they know from, let's say they invest in 10 businesses, maybe 2 might be successful. So if the 2 are successful, in theory, they must be able to cover the money that they might have lost in the other 8. So that's the principle of angel investors, how they invest. And then today we're looking at commercial investing or commercial funding for that matter. So what is commercial funding? Commercial funding is where banks or developmental institutions or funding institutions fund a business to pursue a certain objective. Let's say you have a business and you want to pursue, maybe you want to grow or expand, or you are a startup, or you have a contract. Then in that case, you can approach the funding institution with your funding application so that they can give you a commercial loan. A commercial loan is a loan that you get, and it's got repayment terms with interest. And generally, the funding is used to maybe to buy assets or to fund your operational costs, meaning it's the capital expenditure that you might have as a business, meaning you want to buy an asset either to start a business or to expand the existing business or to execute a contract. And as a business, you know that you need operational costs like your rent, payment of employees, payment of facilities and whatever that the business is using. So those are operational costs. So with the commercial funding, they can fund you for both capital and working capital, or sometimes you just need the working capital. Let's say you have a tender somewhere, then you want to buy, maybe they say you need to supply laptops, then you want to buy maybe, I don't know, 100 laptops, you don't have the funding for it. Then you approach a funding institution, you say, I have this contract and I want to buy this, so many laptops, 100 laptops, this is how much they cost, I have the quotation, the customer is going to pay me so much. So that is more like a bridging finance, to say you buy and then they fund you, then you go buy and then you go deliver. Once the customer pay you, then you need to pay them back. That's like a bridging finance. Then you can get maybe a loan. Okay, it's a loan where you are funding maybe equipment. Let's say I have a factory to manufacture laptops. Maybe there's a new technology that is in the market, then I want to buy that technology. Then I'll approach a funding institution to say, I need to buy this. Can you fund me? Let's say it's R1 million or whatever the amount is. Then I say, can you fund me to buy this? Then what's the commercial funder or the funding institution that you'll have approached? They'll look at your financials, your records to see if it is viable for them or feasible or fundable project, because sometimes the risk is not worth it. Meaning fundable, will they get their money back? That's what they look at. If they see that the chances of them getting their money back is higher than them not getting it back, then they will fund you. So they look at the risk. What are the risk implication? What are the risks here? Can this business pay the money back? That's what the commercial funders look for. And then if you can, then they fund you. You go buy that technology or that equipment, then you install it, then you expand, then you pay them over a period of time. And averagely, the long-term loans are like 5 years on average when you're buying equipment. But it depends on certain sectors. I mean, if, for instance, you want to build a hospital takes long to reach a peak performance or peak capacity. Therefore, the loan and the building loan, because and that you need to build for 6 to 12 months. So you're going to need a loan before you even start operating. So those type of loans, they can go to up to 10 years or even more, depending on the structure. It depends on what you want to fund. So with a loan, it can be 5 years, it can be 1 year, it can be 15 years, depending on the type of business that you are funding. But that's when you are funding things like capital expenses. And then there's as well as working capital funding. Working capital funding means it's funding that you get to pay for operating cost, meaning like things like rent, labor, buying the raw materials and all that. But it's not necessarily a bridging funding. Remember, bridging funding is when you buy and then you just want somebody to bridge you over a shorter period of time until the supplier pays you. But with the working capital, it's a long-termish loan where you ask the funders to say, let's say you are expanding. I'm expanding, I have to hire new people, I have to buy extra material, I have to make sure that I rent a bigger space. I need the working capital to cover me, let's say for 6 months, as I'm expanding my business or as you're starting your business, depending on the stage where your business is. So as you're expanding, then you might need, you run out of cash flow, you might go to a commercial funder to say, I'm looking for what they call working capital to fund my rent, my employees, maybe to buy stock or buy raw material. Then they fund you maybe, they fund you maybe for 6 months or so, and then once you start generating revenue, then you pay them over a period of time. It could be over 3 years, 5 years, but generally advise my clients to say, look, working capital, because it's not an asset, right? You need to look at your financials and financial performance and projection and make sure that you pay it over a short period of time, because it's more a short-term finance. It's not an equipment that you know it's a long-term asset and it's going to take a long time for it to pay you back, or you're going to operate it for a long period of time. So you need to make sure that your funding, it matches the expenses that you'll be spending that money on. If you're buying capex, when you are buying equipment, you need to look at how long will the equipment come into full operation and how long will that equipment last. And then that makes you decide on the period of your loan. And then if you are funding a bridging facility, you need to buy stock so that you deliver it and the customer pays you. That is short term. It doesn't help for you to take maybe a 5-year loan for such funding, because you're going to get the money, you'll end up using that money for the things that you're not supposed to, instead of repaying back the loan. So it's very important to match the type of spending with the loan that you're getting from the commercial funder. So I just highlighted that there are three. There can be other fancy type of funding, the quasi-equity, where the portion of the loan is equity and the portion of the other loan is the money is loan, and then they split it into two. But those are complicated. The aim of this is just to give you the basic to understand how you can access the funding, and then this is just the background to give you a background understanding of the type of funding, the generic type of funding that you get. It's a bridging funding, it's a capital funding, it's a working capital funding. So sometimes they use the overdraft facility to fund their working capital, which makes sense. As you operate, you approach the bank, say, give me an overdraft facility so that whenever I have extra demand or I have a financial requirement, I'll just dip into my overdraft facility so that I continue operating, and once I get the money, then I put it back into that overdraft facility. So if you're using your overdraft facility like that, it means you are using it as a bridge funding. That's a fancy word for it. So that when you're running out of cash, you use the overdraft facility just to bridge you for that period of time until you get back on your feet. That's what the businesses are using the overdraft facility for. So that is the types of funding that you can get. And then I just wanted to highlight, before we get into how you can access this funding, what is required, what are the processes that are followed by this institution for them to grant you the funding. So what is the process that you need to follow for you to access commercial loans? Okay, the first thing is you must have a real financial need, meaning you need to assess your operations, see if you really need funding. If you need funding, how much do you need? Okay, and for you to see if you really need funding, you need to look at your operations to say, here's the operations, then do I need to get this thing funded, or can I bootstrap the business or fund it myself? And the first priority that you need to look at, or you need to prioritize funding the business yourself where possible. I mean, at the initial stage, at a startup phase. Then if you have more customers, then okay, you use your bootstrap to build a business and get to a point where you acquire customers, and then use the commercial funding or apply for commercial funding once you see that you have more customers that you won't be able to service with your own money. Meaning, if I'm running a retail business, I start with buying maybe 10 loaves of bread every day, selling to my people or to my customers. Then as I grow, people know about me. Maybe I start selling 20 a day. Okay, you find that I can still fund 20 a day using my own money. But as I'm expanding, let's say now I get to where I'm selling 100 a day. And I don't have, or I have a demand for 100 a day, but I don't have my own money to buy 100 loaves a day. Then that's when it's a good time for you to approach commercial funder to say, look, I have these clients, they need so many loaves of bread a day. I can only afford to buy 20. Can you fund me to make sure that I have enough capacity to buy 100 a day? Then that kind of application is likely to be successful with a funding institution because it makes sense. One, you understand the operation. You have been operating the spaza shop for some time. Then there is a proven demand for your product. It's just that you don't have the funding to fund the stock, to buy the stock. So a commercial funder will likely to consider your application in a positive light. Rather than saying, I want to start a spaza shop, I want to buy 100 breads. Can you fund me to buy 100 loaves of bread? Then that might be a challenge because you don't have, one, your operating skills are questionable. Okay, yes, selling is easier, but it sounds easy, but if you haven't done it, you haven't proven that you are able to do it, then the funder will have questions to say, will you be able to execute this? And secondly, you don't have the market. You don't have proven market. You're still making assumptions. So now the commercial funder will have a reservation on your application because you haven't proven anything. But if you bootstrap, you get to a certain point in your business, you prove certain things, meaning you reduce their risk. So if you proven certain things, that means you reduce their risk. So they are likely to consider your application on a positive light because there are certain risks that you have mitigated or you have dealt with. They are no longer a risk. Like, can you operate this? Are you committed to the business? Do you have customers for your business? So once you address those things, then it becomes easier when you're applying for funding because you would have addressed certain things that they might consider a risk. Because remember, there is a market. People will buy the bread. That's subjective. It's not an absolute fact because they might give you the money to buy 100 loaves of bread, but only customers not to buy for whatever reason. So, but once you've proven that I can sell 20, but there is a demand because people come to my shop wanting the bread and I don't have. And over a period of time, I've seen that after I sold my first 20, I'll have at least another 100 people coming looking for the same thing. And I wouldn't have stock because I've sold that one in maybe the delivery vehicle comes only once in the morning. So you can't restock. Then it makes sense when a commercial funder or a funding institution sit on the other side. They see facts, they see information that will help them to make their decision easier to fund you. But believe me, trying to secure funding from a commercial institution, it's a momentous task. So you need to make sure that you have all your ducks in a row. You have done your spade work. You have done all that you can do to get to a certain point. And then you say, I've pushed to here. Please help me move from here to here. Instead of, please help me to start. You need to take, not always, you can apply. And sometimes it could be very, very frustrating. So, but my advice is make sure that you set up, use your own funds to take your business to a certain point, and then you approach a commercial funder to take you to the next level. Because it takes money sometimes to grow your business to the next level, because sometimes it will take you longer, and sometimes if you can provide your customers with holistic or a complete package of services, you might lose them in the long run. So sometimes it's better for you to provide your customers with a full package of services or products rather than providing them with one. Yes, you can start with one. Once you build your reputation and you build your brand in the market, then you expand to other products. Now, I'm just using the spaza shop as an example to say, maybe you can start with selling bread only. And then as they come, maybe what goes with bread, maybe it's acha or whatever, sugar or tea or chips, whatever thing that complements the product that you are selling. Then you start building from there. And it will depend on your customers as well. If you start with the bread, they'll ask, why don't you sell this and this? Why then? Then if you see there are many customers who are looking for this product, then you add it to your stock. And then as the customers come, some will ask, once you see that there are many customers who are inquiring about certain product, then you add it to your stock. Meaning, instead of just starting with a bang, with all type of product, you have your store, your shop is full, maybe your customers might not buy certain product and they'll get rotten and it's a loss. So we always want to start big, and that's why we don't start. But sometimes if you start small, then you can read and understand your customer behavior, your customer's behavior, and then from there you can adapt your business model and then make sure that you buy things that your customers will buy. That is the way, the best approach. But there are certain industries that you can't start small. It's like mining. You need to set up a full operation, fully fledged operation for you to start mining. You can't say, no, I'm going to mine with my shovel. Okay, maybe, but with my shovel, and then get to a certain point where I've proven that the market exists for the product. I've proven that I can mine, then fund. No, with mining, you need to go full operation because one, remember with mining as well, maybe it's underground, whatever, there's a lot of risk involved. So you might have to go look for funding before you even start operating. Okay? Or maybe it's the hospital. Yeah, you can maybe start with few wards, but ideally you need to start with a fully functioning hospital so that you bring confidence into the market and you will be able to service your patients accordingly. Because setting up a hospital without theater, without pharmacy, then you are just applying for disaster. You might have an operating license, but there are minimum requirements for you to start operating. Therefore, in that scenario, you wouldn't be able to start maybe bootstrapping on your own because it's a big project, but you need to do feasibility study to understand the market. So I'm not saying you can start all businesses with your own funds, but most of the businesses, even if you want to manufacture certain things, sometimes you start by buying, can import from China or wherever and start selling and see how the market reacts to your product. And then as you sell, you get to a point where you see that you have a sufficient market to sustain your factory. Then you set up a factory. Then that's where you go for commercial funding to say, look, I was doing a retail model and then I've proven that there is a market for this product of mine. But now I need funding for it to take me to the next level. Because sometimes with the retail, if you're not manufacturing, you might find that you're making small profit margins. Okay, so now that you've proven this market, you've proven the type of product that your customers like, now you've proven commitment to this business, then when you go out into the funding world, it makes it easier for commercial funders to fund you. So that's the approach that it's ideal for me. I prefer people starting with what they have and approach commercial funders later. Because remember, statistically, they say like it's more than 70% of all startups fail. So commercial funders are a little bit skeptical when it comes to funding startups, because they fail. If you look at the statistics, or not statistics necessarily, the researches that are out there on failure of startups, believe me, I haven't seen the one that is stating anything less than 70% of startups fail within the first 3 years. So commercial funders are a little bit skeptical in funding startups, which makes sense because most of them fail. So if you want to get funding, I know there's a complaint to say in South Africa, our financial system, they don't support small businesses. It's true, and I agree with that view. But what I'm saying is we must also meet the system halfway. We understand that we have, coming from history, it's easier to fund a white business versus a black business because of our historical background. That is understandable. Yes, there are challenges in terms of funding, even from the DFIs, the assessments, the laziness within the institutions, and the requirements in terms of own contribution. Yes, there are those complications, I understand. But what I'm saying is make it easier or make it difficult for them to reject your application by making sure that you start with what you have. Push your business as far as you can without external support, and approach external support when you are at a certain point, because you will have proven yourself. Yes, those other things, they can still come into play. I'm not denying that, but you're just making it difficult for the other side to reject your application. It makes it easier for them to see that this entrepreneur is committed to this business. That's one in terms of the approach that you can take to apply for funding, starting using your own funds, push your business to a certain level, and then go and apply for commercial funding. Or you can start by applying for commercial funding and show them that you have funds to put in. If you have, you just apply upfront before you put anything on the ground, so that you can see the appetite out there. And then there might be condition to say, for us to support you, we're looking for 1, 2, 3, 4. Then you go sort out the 1, 2, 3, 4. Then you go to apply for funding. Because sometimes if you start, there are certain businesses that even if you start, it might not be sustainable without bigger funding. So before you start, knowing that there is a risk that if I don't get commercial funding, I will fail, then you rather go to commercial funders and ask them, submit your application, get feedback. There might be certain things that they need. Then you start fixing the things that they need to make sure that your application is funding ready. And then once that is sorted, then you get funding. Then you go ahead and execute whatever the project that you're executing. So there are two approaches that you can use as an entrepreneur. You start on your own to a certain level, or you start by applying for funding for a startup capital, which means you don't have revenue, you don't have anything. You just want them to fund you to start generating revenue. Okay. So in my view, the one way you start, you put it to a certain level, you put your business to a certain level, it's easier to access funding, excuse me, in that way, compared to applying for funding to start from scratch. So the two, you can explore both of them. It doesn't mean you need, even if you are doing this one, you can start by applying anyway. But remember, applying for funding as well, it takes time. You need to invest resources. They'll want projections, quotations, blah, blah, blah. There's a lot of things that we're going to go into that they might be looking for before they consider your application, or before they approve your application. So if possible, as you're building up, make sure that you're pushing your application as well, so that as they ask questions, you are learning the things that they are looking for as you're growing, so that by the time you get to a certain point, you already build a relationship or an understanding of what the commercial funder is looking for. What I'm saying is, accessing funding or applying for funding is a project on its own, and you must think about it carefully to say, which approach are you taking? And whichever the approach that you're taking, obviously you need to meet their requirements and all that and submit their business application, which will go into details in terms of what is required and how they facilitate the funding. And remember, funding is critical, because sometimes, even if when you start on your own, if you underfund your business, you might run out of capital to maintain your business, which is commercially viable, but it might have needed a little bit more capital for it to be sustainable. Then at that point, you might fail because you are failing to access the commercial funding. So hence I'm saying, maybe even if you are building, but you know in future your business is not sustainable without big funding. Let's say you're doing a retail, you start with a retail model before you get into production. Let's say you are selling books, the strategy is for you to produce the books rather than buying and selling. Then as you continue buying and selling, it might get to a point, because you are selling maybe at a discount, a point where your customers are too big, but your storage and all that, the cost of facilitating, importing and all that, it starts to be more than the price that the market is willing to pay. So that now can cause you troubles unless you start producing locally. So keep in mind the approach that you're taking, it might cause your business to fail. If you're a startup, you go for big funding from a word go. The market can take a little bit longer to accept your product. And if that happens, that means you'll be generating less revenue. And if you are generating less revenue, then you wouldn't have money to pay the funder. And if you don't have the money to pay the funder, they'll end up calling their loan, and then you might fail because you took too much debt too early. So those are the things that you need to consider. Yes, it might be difficult to get funding for a startup, but it might be good for you anyway, because you might, if funding was freely available or easily available, then a lot of people will get into debt because they don't start by building and understanding the sector. They just apply for funding. Once they get the funding, then you find that the market doesn't, because the market is not always what you think. Once you start giving them the real product, they can tell you no letters of intent, they can sign left, right, and center. But once you start producing, then you see the true colors of customers. And if you have too much debt or too much money on your balance sheet, or you have raised too much funding, then you might struggle to maintain that funding. And the funders will be looking for their money because, as I said earlier, remember the commercial loan is you enter into an agreement with the funder with an agreed repayment terms. And when you start breaching those agreed repayment terms, then they'll take you to court or take you to task in terms of you paying them. And you can fail to pay them, meaning you are financially unsustainable and the business might fail. So funding as well can contribute both sides. Even if you are funding yourself, you might not have sufficient capital to sustain the business and you fail, or you raise more than you need, or not more than you need, you raise sufficient funding but the market takes longer to accept your product. You might as well fail from that side. So if you think you need funding, do your proper analysis, take the appropriate step for your business. It can be either you bootstrap first to a certain point and then you look for funding, or if it's not possible, then you look for funding from day one. But there are implications on both options. Whichever option that you choose, there are implications. Make sure there are risks involved. Make sure you understand the risk so that you choose the right approach to accessing funding. Okay, now that we have ascertain the approach that we're going to take when you're looking for the funding, now you need a business plan. You need to develop a business plan. I know most entrepreneurs develop business plan for funders, right? But you need, even for yourself, even if you are bootstrapping your business, you are funding your business yourself, you are getting grants or incentives, or you have an investor, angel investor, you need to develop a business plan. Because the business plan now is your guiding tool in terms of what is expected, how you're going to achieve your objectives and revenue, and how you're going to market your business, how you're going to operate, what are your mission, vision, and the type of team or the size of the team that you will need for you to execute on this project. So you do a proper business plan, and we have done the business plan development lesson. If you have a skills program for that, if you want to understand how you develop a business plan, you can watch that and read that lesson. And once you develop a business plan, then you need to make sure that you have the necessary statutory documents in place: company registration, tax clearance, bank statement or proof of bank. You have quotations for assets or whatever the cost that you want. It must be supported by quotations. Make sure that you have all the regulatory compliance that might be required in your sector. The business plan has got financial projection. It's got the breakdown on how much funding is required. That's now you preparing to access the funding, right? Make sure that you have all the documents that I've mentioned. You prepare them. You have them in a set so that you will be able to present to the financial institution. And then maybe also prepare a pitch deck, like a maybe 5-page presentation of the business to summarize the business, the vision, the missions, and then where you're going, why you need the funding, and the financial projection to see that you'll be able to pay back the loan. That's now on the preparation. Those are the basic documents that you need to make sure you have in place, right? And then the next is, once you've prepared those, then you look for funding institutions that fund your industry. And remember, there are certain institutions that fund different industries. Let's say it's a commercial bank. Not obviously, but most of them, they don't fund thin industries like your weapons, your cigarettes, your alcohol. So you find that there are certain institutions that they don't fund such industries. And you have certain institutions or some institutions that fund from a certain amount up to a certain amount. Like if you look at CIFA, it will fund you up to 15 million. NEF 250 to 75 million, if that's still the case. And then maybe you have IDC, it's 1 million to up to 1 billion. And then you have commercial banks, they'll fund you for anything. Okay, maybe they'll have different maximums depending on the security that you can give them and proof of market that you can give them. Obviously, the banks, they're looking for security. They're looking at the source. Where will you be getting the money from? If those two are reliable, then they will be able to fund you. So you need to look at the institutions that can help you. They can help fund your project. And as I mentioned, like you find like your NEF focuses on black-owned institutions or black control. I'm not sure if it's owned or controlled, but they're looking at BE compliant businesses. And then CIFA, okay, they're funding almost anything except maybe SIN, where you're selling alcohols or manufacturing alcohol or arms and all those things. And then, but up to 15 million. And then you have your business partners. Okay, those are government institutions. And then you have your business partners, which is private. Okay, I think CIFA's got shares in there, but as well, they have, I think, from 150 to 15 million as well. Or 25 now. Okay, I'm not sure about their maximum, but they also fund a wide range of industries. They are not limited to certain industries, unlike IDC, which is more on industrial sector. They're focusing on industrial sector. So industrial sector meaning less services, more manufacturing sector, because you're agro processing rather than agriculture, which is primary. They don't do primary farming unless it's integrated with agro processing, where you're processing things. They don't do maybe your retail type of setup unless the other institution cannot help you. If you're doing a retail, maybe you're buying a 80 million, you are setting up a 80 million worth of a retail operation. NEF can help you, CIFA can help you, then IDC might consider such investment. So even though they have limited sector, but strategically, if it's important, they might help you. And you have other institutions like your DTI, which is a combination. You can have a combination of a grant and a commercial loan, and then you have other, maybe your provincial TFIs, depending on that. Like you have in KZN, they have Itala. Then we have maybe GPF in Gauteng. You have Free State Development Corporation. You have Limpopo Development Corporation. In Mpumalanga, they have their own. Western Cape, they'll have their own. So you get different funding institutions that fund different mandates. So you need to understand, to do your research, to see in the sector that I'm in, which institution can I approach, and what is their mandate, and what is their approach in funding. So once you've done the research and you know which institution can you approach, you're approaching a bank, but a bank must have solid assets, and your business must be, they hardly fund startups. But even the TFIs, they claim to fund startups, but it's a mission for you to get your startup funded by those institutions. Unless like your C5 is a startup, then it's a franchise where you have a reputable franchisor behind you, or you are buying an existing business. And what else that are easy for startups, or you have a contract that you want to fund, or you have an off-take agreement. Like if you approach them with a startup, then your startup must be solid, must be sitting on solid ground, meaning technically you must be very solid, and market-wise you must have secured a serious market. So those are the things. Yes, you might go there, say I've done feasibility study, but unless if maybe you have a franchise, can be food, service station, whatever, that is behind you, then it makes it easier for them to fund you. But if you just come, some black guy from some rural area, and then you said you have done feasibility study, here's, I need a startup funding for 5 million. Believe me, even if they don't reject you directly, you'll spend years trying to get that. They don't want this and that, want this and that. So be careful. If you're looking for funding and you're a startup, make sure that you are on solid ground, meaning technically you can execute. You have the required legislative approvals, the certificates, whatever that is needed for you to operate that business. And lastly, you have secured the market. And securing the market is one thing, right? It must be a viable market, meaning there could be a market, but you might find that market is not really viable. What do I mean by not being viable? What I mean is, I remember in my previous life, we're looking at an application form to set up a roof sheet manufacturer. I don't forget this example. Probably in most videos I always give example on this. They wanted to set it up in Limpopo, and there was no manufacturer in that area. And from face value, it looked like a great business idea, right? There is no manufacturer. They got not off-take, but letters of intent, and some off-take, but most were letters of intent for all their production. So you'll think the market is secured. But when you start looking at it closely, the price that this market was willing to buy the product, the roof sheets, it was not even making up the production cost. Yes, they are willing to buy. They'll take all your product that you're producing. But at what price? Is the price viable? No, you can have the market. People are willing to buy. You can have the necessary skills to produce, but to only find that when you put them together, the thing that you're producing is not making you money. It's not economically viable. That's what it means. You can sell, but it's not making money. So whatever the concept, the business that you're pushing, trying to secure funding for, make sure that you are comfortable that is viable. Because believe me, the commercial funders will interrogate that. They'll look at the financial. So now I'm coming into what the commercial funders are looking for them to give you funding. One is viability, what I just spoke about. To say your business must make economic sense. It must be economically viable, meaning you must be able to make profit or make money from your operation. That's one of the, that's the critical one. That's a starting point. Because if it's not making money, if it's not economical, if it can't economically make money, then you won't get funding. So what are they looking for you to access funding? One, certain institutions, you need to complete application forms, like your bank, I know CEDA, CIFA, NEF, Land Bank, GBSA. They need you to complete an application form, right? And then I know with IDC, they don't have an application form. I don't know now, but things change. But as far as I know, they just need your business plan, then they initiate the application process. The application process at IDC is initiated by the business plan. Then once you submit the business plan, they look at it. Like they do what you call desktop analysis. So they just look at what you submitted. Does it make sense? Okay, if it makes sense, then they look at the documentation now. Have you submitted the figure documents for the company, meaning the registration document, the B certificate, tax clearance, proof of bank statements, those kind of things. And then, and all the relevant certificates in terms of the approvals. And then next they look at the individuals, the directors. IDs, marriage certificate, proof of res, and the financials. Even for business, they look at the financial statements. So they look at the documents that you have submitted. And next, they look at your operational. Will you be able to execute this? So they do, it's called now, that is just the administration due diligence, right? And they come to operational due diligence. Do you have licenses? Do you have the equipment? Can the equipment produce what you say they'll produce? Access to water, access to electricity, access to labor, people who will be producing, the yields from the area. If you are farming, they will look at the soil and all those things. If you are manufacturing, they will look at the logistics, access to raw material. That is called due diligence now. So they're investigating the operational side to say, operationally, can you operationalize this thing? And then on the other side, on one side, they're looking at the market. Who are your customers? Are they sustainable? How much are they buying for? Are they consistent? How far are they? They look at the trend. And then is the market sufficient for the business to be able to pay back the loan? So they look at your market. They'll speak to your customers. If you give them letters of intent or off-take agreements, or if you're existing, they'll look at your existing customers in terms of the ratings and all that. So they look at how strong your market is. And then they'll look at technical, in terms of the people. Do you have enough management skills? Can you execute on this project? Will you be able to get the team that will be able to deliver on this? And on the other side, they look at your financials. Now that they look at operations, they looked at your marketing, they looked at your team, now they look at financially. Does this business make sense? Will this business be able to generate enough income or enough economic profit to pay us back the money? And after they've done this assessment, then they submit it to whatever, if the team or the individual, depending on the approach of that institution, if the team or the individual believes that your business is viable, then they will submit a report to the relevant approval authority. Sometimes it's committees. I know the DFIs, they have investment committees where they present. Then they present your case. Obviously, you need to build a good relationship with the team because you will not be there in that committee. They will be your mouthpiece. So you don't have to fight with them. You might have disagreements, but ultimately you need to understand that this team is the same team, or this individual will be the one who's talking on your behalf in the meeting. So they go present your business case, and either the committee approves or rejects. Then you get the communication that I know your application was approved or application was rejected. And once the application is rejected, okay, then maybe you'll complain and do all the other things, but that's the end of the road. If it's approved, then that's when you get into entering into agreements now. You sign the loan agreements, the terms of payment and all that. And sometimes you'll have the condition precedents, meaning these are the conditions that you need to meet before they give you the money. I've seen a lot of application where the funding is approved, you get excited, you throw a party, and then there are certain conditions that you need to meet, and you fail to meet those conditions. So the funding is approved on condition that you meet certain requirements. And if you meet those requirements, then the funds get dispersed, and you go buy, build, or do whatever that you need to do with the funding. And I must say, generally, the funding is not, unless if it's for working capital, they prefer to pay directly to suppliers. So if it's for equipment, if it's for building and all those things, they'll rather pay it directly to suppliers, because entrepreneurs, they can be trusted with the funds. No, okay, not all of them, but most of them. Once you have the money in the bank, you might not do what you're supposed to do. So their preference is the funds they get paid to your suppliers, or people will be supplying you. If it's a building, maybe to the builder or whoever where you're buying the material from, which is the safer route. Even for you as an entrepreneur, that's the best route that they pay there, and they pay into a bank account only what is due to you or what needs to be paid there. Most of the time is for working capital. And as I said, that they looked at the team, right? They requested those figure documents. So include media checks in there, they'll include credit checks, they'll check if you are not politically exposed and all those things. Because if you are politically exposed, then the risks are becoming higher, because, okay, I guess politicians cannot, okay, I almost said politicians cannot be trusted. But being in politics is high risk, so they need to consider those things when they're checking your team. I just forgot to mention that. And okay, once it's dispersed, obviously there will also be conditions and expectations in the agreement. Let's say that maybe directors can take so much salaries, you need to submit the management accounts on this date, financial statements, maybe you hold the board meetings, they appoint a board member on your board. If your business is that big that it will attract a board member, then they appoint that. Then that's now post-investment. There will be post-investment activities that you need to meet, and they will have certain covenants, they call it covenants, that your business needs to meet for the loan to remain active. Meaning, if you drop maybe your asset to equity, or your debt structure drops to a certain level, or your interest cover drops to a certain level, then that covenant will have been broken, and then they can request their money. So they'll put the conditions that you're not supposed to break while you're operating, because if you break them, then you need to, they can call on their facility, or they give you a chance to remedy those situations. And there will be a loan agreement, then you need to pay them, can be monthly. Okay, generally it's monthly, but depending on the type of funds that they give you, it might be maybe quarterly or whatever. If it includes the fancy funding, which is equity, maybe there's equity, there's loan. They can give you different type of loans that have different types of repayments. Then that's it. That's the process of accessing funding, accessing commercial funding. It's a lot of work. Look at it as a project. You need to decide if you really need the money, and when are you going to apply for funding. Are you going to try to bootstrap first, or you're going for funding as a startup? Is your business ready to apply for funding? Do you have financial records? Do you have your compliance with your industry documents and requirements? Do you have the necessary skills operationally Do you have the quotations? Do you have the market? Your credit reports are clean? Are you clean? And they look at those things. Are you ready to access the funding? And once they access the funding, then you do the application process. They do the due diligence, and then your application gets approved. And once it's approved, the money gets dispersed. Once the money is dispersed, then it's post-investment, where you need to meet certain things that you need to meet based on the agreement. And we have the Super Dealmaker app that will help you get you ready to access funding. It's a free business plan. It shows you, once you develop the business plan, you indicate the documents that will be required, and there's a due diligence application that will rate you in terms of your readiness. It will also rate you in terms of the skills that you have and the skills that will be required, or training opportunity that exists. So you can use the Super Dealmaker app to access funding by completing your business plan there, uploading documents, doing your due diligence, and then making sure that you have the necessary skills for you to access the funding. So this Super Dealmaker app is designed to give entrepreneurs access to funding. Make use of it. It's easy to use. It takes a lot of time out of the time that you would have spent and the money that you would have spent on consultants. Okay, that's the access to funding lesson. And next we'll be going into access to market skills program. I thank you.